Hello, lovely beings. I'm JJ Rose. I wanted to do a more advanced episode on attachments and dark passengers because I feel that in the content that I've done before, I've grazed over why they happen, kind of the greatest hits, if you will. But there is an importance once you get deeper into your work, into your spiritual work, and interacting with other people, and the more sensitive that you become, that you understand why attachments and dark passengers even exist, why people want to keep them, why you need to leave them alone if someone wants to keep it, as well as the functions that they serve. Because this gets into a very big topic. And first and foremost, I want to say I know many people with attachments and dark passengers, and I still love them, hang around them. I know that they're there. Typically, the people know that they're there too, and they want to keep them. And that is not my business. If they want to keep it, that's their choice. A lot of people, when they're getting into this work, everything becomes very like black and white, right? Where if it's bad, then you want it gone. If it's good, you want it to stay. But now, which is why I'm labeling this advanced, we're going to delve into why do these things happen? What is the function that they serve? And why it isn't our business to get involved or to intervene. And also how to keep yourself safe, but also how to be a resource to other people who have them when they are ready for them to go. First and foremost, I want to expressly state that I am talking about only things on a spiritual level and in a spiritual nature. I am not talking about mental illness. I am not talking about diagnosing anyone. This is simply something that you're picking up on a spiritual level, or that you're seeing certain signs of and you're trying to suss out or figure out what you're dealing with. So let's start at the beginning, right? A person is born, and there's a lot of people who think that when there are children or babies that they're innocent and therefore they can't have any of these things. And unfortunately, that is false. There are people who are born with attachments. They are usually generational attachments, i.e., they go from one generation to the next. Sometimes they can skip a generation, i.e., they can go from like a grandparent to the grandchild. There are cases where people are just born with them due to other instances, sometimes with the parents, but you have to understand that there is a soul contract that was made, that that child was going to come in with that attachment. It is that person's burden or that person's defense mechanism. Oftentimes you will find this in families in which there's a lot of abuse, whether that is substance, emotional, physical. The child almost needs something dark to help protect it from the other darkness that it's going to be around. And I know that's very heavy and very complicated for some of you, but it is a thing. So, obviously everyone comes in, they have their, their guardians, they also have their spiritual team. But there are times when children are born or at a very young age that they have something dark come to them and attach. And it is a symbiotic relationship. They feed off of one another, and the attachment is actually helpful to the child, especially during those young formative years when the child is probably around some really ugly, ugly stuff. And the reality of this life and of this work is that ugly stuff exists. And as much as we can pray against it and rally against it and do whatever it is that we can to make sure that's not happening actively in our lives, our friends' lives, our families' lives, it happens. Stuff happens. It's part of people's soul contracts. People signed up in order to come in here and experience different things. It's part of our world, and we have to accept it. And there are things that you can do something about, and there's a lot, unfortunately, in this life that there's nothing you can do about it. So finding that inner balance within and understanding, what can I actually do something about? What can I not? And you just put the rest in prayer and trust and know that there's a bigger plan afoot than whatever your opinion is. And I'm not saying your opinion isn't valid. I'm just saying that part of just balancing out with this work is understanding that sometimes there are things that are going to be happening, or things that will happen, whether you're privy to them or not, that you don't have any business in being involved with. They have to play out the way that they have to play out. So that being said, yes, there are times when children are actually born and these things attach immediately. It's not always a fault of the parents. There are times when it's a wonderful family, everything is good, the parents have done everything great and good that they possibly can. That's usually when it's a soul contract issue. I'm sure you could see things going on in that child's life down the road that might not be what we would want for ourselves or anybody else, but that again is their contract. Now, there are also cases of children who are extremely open and gifted. And there are a lot of them coming in right now and have been. So a lot of you out there who are parents and you have children under the, whatever age they are, you could have a child of any age at this point. A lot of your children are gifted, especially if you're gifted, more than likely your children are. Whether your children talk to you about it or not is, more of a situation of what you've allowed at home and what you guys are discussing and that openness. But I do advise any of you who have children to have these conversations and see, especially if your children are young and they're already being able to demonstrate some of their gifts, whether it's by prognostication, meaning that they're, stating this, that, and the other is going to happen and it happens, or if they're telling you that they're seeing stuff and you've gone through all the normal ways of sussing out, could this be their imagination, something that they watched, a fear, etc. And, all that's been rolled out. And then you start going into this realm, and usually you're sensitive enough as well to be able to feel, okay, something is going on here more than just a regular childhood fear. In these cases, because the children are so open, they are so gifted, if there is not a good spiritual foundation, and I have seen this happen with 2 and 3-year-olds, where, no one's talking to these kids about anything like this. And these kids are seeing stuff, describing things, prognosticating, and no one's really dealing with the underlying issue. All it takes is a nasty neighbor with something, or a whole bunch of whatever happening in the community near you, and these things can find children who are open. And there are times when the children are almost open to it because whether or not they understand at the time in their mind, children understand a lot more than you give them credit for, honestly, but there can sometimes be a purpose for it. So recently I had a situation where it was a 3.5-year-old, and he was definitely sensing stuff, had already prognosticated. Parents knew he was gifted. It ran in the family, so it wasn't a big shock or surprise. But there were some neighbors who had moved in, and there was a lot of drug abuse going on within that family. And all of a sudden, the kid starts saying really nasty things to his parents that, first of all, this kid had never been exposed to that kind of language, let alone even come up with these thoughts to say certain things. And it really freaked the parents out because, they went through, is the kid getting anything on the internet? All the normal things that you want to rule out, right? Like, is the kid hearing this? Did someone, put on a movie that had something? Is the kid hearing this maybe through the window? Nope, ruled all that out. Did a little bit of a deeper investigation, and literally it was just all the stuffs that the neighbors had going on. And, one took a peek over the fence, saw this open child, and the child obviously could see it and sense it, and the child didn't know any better and had interactions with it. And it came and hung out for a little bit. Now, obviously, it's gone now. The child is completely back to normal, not saying any of those things anymore. And, barriers were put up in order to make sure that doesn't happen again. But this is part of the reason why, for all of you parents, if I've had conversations with you one on one or even in a group, where I will strongly advise you, your children are little sponges. They hear and understand more than you think that they do. And thinking, oh, I'm going to protect them, I don't need to talk about this stuff is scary. There are non-scary ways that you can have these conversations with your kids. They understand, as long as you're giving them a strong and good foundation and teaching them how they can fight against things like that. Doing their bubbles, doing light blasting, things like that. All of that is going to help them while they get up in age, because trust and believe, when they get in their tweens and teen years, they're going to need that solid foundation for all the stuff in the world that's going to be coming at them. And it's coming from all directions, not just social media and TV. It's coming from society itself. Kids nowadays are inundated with different stuff, with different energies. Our world is full of a lot of different energies right now. And as you all know, because I've been talking about it, with the veil being down and what it is, and us going into another round, another year of this where I don't foresee anything changing and only getting more and more open, it's extremely important that we understand certain things now, and we're imbuing our children with the capacity to take care of these things themselves and not relying on other people. Again, this is the whole purpose of why I made my channel, to give people information to take your power back, empower yourselves so that you're not relying on someone else to do this stuff for you. All right, after that little tangent. So in children's years, when they start getting into school and, from ages 5 on up, and they're encountering different things in their lives that mom, dad aren't always around for, school sometimes has bullies. Kids are pretty cruel at times. They can be absolutely wonderful, but kids are usually very direct and blunt, and they don't know how to soft soap things. So, the whole adage of kids are cruel isn't necessarily wrong, because they can be. And again, it's just because of this blunt honesty that children have. And sometimes they're also taught to be that way because of things that they've seen in society or they think that are fun. So during these years, as children are growing up, I cannot tell you the number of people I've met with attachments or dark passengers that formed when they were young, i.e. between the ages of like 5, 6 to about 10 or 11. And most of the time they came from the kids being bullied or teased and having just enough stuff going on at home or nothing going on at home, i.e., they're not getting a lot of attention and love and affirmation. And they almost reach out into the ether for a friend. I want you really to listen to what I'm saying. They reach out to the ether for a friend. But as we know, not everyone is your friend. And so if you have a kid who doesn't know any better, who's reaching out in the ether because they're having anger issues, they're getting teased, they're getting bullied, or they're not getting enough attention or affection at home, it's just the right cocktail of things that are happening for that child, and they start looking for a friend on a spiritual level, and just the right timing, something comes a sniffing around, that's when these attachments can occur. And again, it is a symbiotic relationship. They are mutually beneficial at first. So typically that child will feel like all of a sudden they have what adults would call like liquid courage, right? Well, these kids are all of a sudden with this attachment going to feel like they can tell off this bully, or all of a sudden they're able to push or throw a punch. and it really lands deep, let's say, more so than their body would normally be able to produce. So this thing is almost imbuing them with a way to protect themselves from whatever they're seeing as the major threat. And in turn, this thing is feeding off of their anger, resistance, frustration, apathy, agony, whatever it may be. And so they almost feel like this is their friend. And therefore, they feel power from it. And this is not a normal situation. I mean, this isn't, mind games or an imaginary friend. This is a little more than that. And you will start seeing things in the household that present that this child is dealing with a little bit something other than, maybe anger issues. Usually when therapy or something like that comes up, the kid gets very defensive and or resistant to it. Usually these children will actually act out and say things that they've not been exposed to. Almost things that are a little too adult for their age group. And, probably the parent would be wondering, okay, where did you hear that, or who's saying that? And they're not able to trace it back to anything that's known. Over time, usually during the teen years and during the 20s, when you involve drugs and alcohol into the equation, these kids with these attachments will naturally will want to go and do those things. They have a proclivity towards wanting to try things like this because, again, it opens up that barrier just a little bit more for these attachments to work through and really have their fun. And sometimes you will see physical changes when these things are presenting themselves. Some people will say the eyes go black or the face has a different look. One person I'm thinking of in particular, their mouth does this very weird thing where it's almost like the lip curls, but at this very strange angle, almost like they had a stroke, to be perfectly honest. And that's when this thing is presenting. I usually can see it in the person's eyes as well. It's not full-on possession. It's the attachment is kind of riding the person for a short term. And that's usually what's occurring in these instances. It's not a full-on possession, i.e. it's there forever, and it's, a very high up on the echelon scale. It's a dark entity or lower than that, but it gets to ride that person for a little bit in order to do whatever it is, whether it's use drugs and alcohol, whether it is to fight, whether it is to say really awful things or saying really awful things or doing really awful things in order to get people out of its way so it can go and do whatever it is that it wants to do, which usually isn't nice stuff that, it's not going to go knit and do macrame. We'll put it that way. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because there's such a history between this person and this attachment, this hitchhiker and or entity, depending on what it is, because they have a history together and because this thing has made itself useful, they don't necessarily want to let it go. And most of them know that they have it. I have had extremely frank conversations with people who are not spiritual, not religious, don't really talk about any of this stuff. And they will all of a sudden just look at me and very matter of fact say, like, yeah, I know I have attachment and I know it makes me do X, Y, and Z. But I want to keep it because it blah, blah, blah. Or we have good history together, i.e. it got me through a lot of tough times. And so there becomes this toxic relationship between the two. And, obviously, in a light worker's mind, you're going to think, well, the whole reason you want to keep it is because it makes you feel good in the past and has, but you're not seeing that, it's disrupting your life and keeping you from living the full and fulfilled life that you want to live, i.e. without, substance abuse, without physical abuse, without toxic actions. or behaviors. But because this bond is so strong, they don't want to let it go. And I've had one time in particular with one person where they do realize that the attachment is negative. They do understand that it's disrupting their life. They do understand all the things that I just stated. Like, it's not good for me. I want it gone. And so we agreed, okay, let's go ahead and let's work together on having you dismiss it. And this thing came forward out of nowhere because we had arranged a certain time to get together. And all of a sudden this thing shows up unannounced early, writing this person, and basically just acted up. We'll put it that way. I don't have nice words to say about that interaction, but it wasn't pleasant. We'll put it that way. And it taunted me and basically told me, you can do whatever you want, but I'm not going anywhere. And I was like, okay, well, we're just gonna see about that later. But as of right now, that attachment is a little too strong. And so it is up to the human to decide if they really want it gone and to rein it in, control it, and tell it to leave and sever that attachment and then heal whatever brought that attachment forward. And for some people, the healing has to start before the removal can even begin. And unfortunately, that attachment is going to fight tooth and nail. These are the people that they say they want to go to therapy, but then, they'll run when you get them to the therapist's office, or they go to therapy and then they refuse to talk about anything. I've seen this manifest in so many different ways that I could sit here for hours and tell you all tons of different stories, but I'm trying to keep it as concise as I can so that you all get the overall general gist. So, if you know someone who has an attachment or a hitchhiker, and you're pretty sure, and they've told you that they want to work on removing it, my best advice for you would be to help them start healing the reason why it showed up to begin with. And that's going to go back to some very old wounds and some very old stuff, depending on when it came along. And usually they will know when it showed up. There have been cases where children who were open just lived in a place that had some really bad vibes and they picked it up from there. Again, there are generational things. And if you're dealing with a generational attachment, it is going to be a lot more hefty work in order to remove it, because you have to go back and figure out what generation it started at, which is a lot of meditation work. You're probably going to be having to work with a psychic, and or with yourself. If you're trying to figure out that, you're going to be really having to do some in-depth heavy work. And I can tell you, it's usually not something that's done in like 15 minutes. This is something that's usually done over the course of weeks or months to determine who brought it forward and why it was brought forward to begin with. Was there a contract that was signed? That's also extremely important when it comes to generational things, because with that, there could have been a reason why an ancient family member decided to bring this thing through and have it carry forward in the familial line. Sometimes it could be because there is a genetic issue, and other times it, can deal with curses and or with just a deity that a family member was working with. And sometimes this stuff goes back like 40, 50 generations. Like, this isn't just, great grandma on to present. Like, this can go back, right? So when I'm telling you some of this work gets very dicey and you have to have patience with it, I earnestly mean that, because this is not something to be taken lightly. Now, we have people who are full-fledged adults. They know better, they have a good spiritual foundation, and for whatever reason, they choose to go playing around in the dark sandbox and form an attachment. Now, these are situations where the person went actively looking for an attachment. And usually it involves a contract, and usually it is a mutually beneficial instance. One person in particular that I know who did this, they did it because they wanted to know certain information. And instead of doing the work themselves, they wanted something who was going to give them an edge. And so they basically made a deal and, signed a contract, if you will, in having this thing come forward. And here's the thing about contracts, spiritual contracts. They exist. They're there. They can be negotiated. I did not say broken. I said negotiated because, again, it was a contract. So, you and whatever the entity was that you signed up with agreed on something. And when you go messing with things you don't understand, which is what I'm telling you over and over not to do, but when you ask for help, whether it's a deity, an entity, whatever it is, and you sign a contract or you say you will do whatever it takes or whatever this entity wants, you're going to have to fulfill your end of the bargain. Now, once again, I said you can negotiate some of these contracts. And unfortunately, some of the ways to negotiate them aren't always super duper pleasant. And that usually means that you're going to have another food source for them, or you're going to have to allow them some free reign in one end of your life where they're no longer running the original part that was signed up for. So again, this is why I'm very wary on doing an advanced deep dive on this if you haven't already listened to some of my previous content, in order to understand a basic foundation of understanding. Because when I get into some of this, some of you are going to think, who in their right mind would sign up for that? But you would be shocked. You would be absolutely shocked. And I am not talking about people who, sell their soul in order to get famous and stuff like that. No, I'm not talking about that. I am talking about normal, everyday people who basically sign contracts with entities for things that maybe you and I would think are mundane or that we could easily achieve ourselves. But for whatever reason, they thought that was a good idea. And that's the route that they went. And again, no judgment, to each their own. Everyone has their own different practice and understanding. But here is my big warning label. If you are going to work with a deity or an entity, and I do say deity because there are a lot of people who do deity work, and that's absolutely fine. But you need to be very, very clear and understand what you are working with. There are a lot of people who have been interested in different cultures and their gods or goddesses or their deities. And so they start wearing pendants and they start, talking about these things as if they know so much and reading a lot on them and almost glorifying them in a way. But you have to understand that if you want to work with these entities or these deities, they have a price. And a lot of times people will go blindly into these things, not understanding that they have to pay their end of the bargain. And I've known more than a few who have been in some very ugly, sticky situations because they didn't understand what they were signing up for. And now they're knee deep in the swamp. And all of a sudden they're asked to pay up and they don't wanna, because now they feel like, oh, well, I didn't understand, so I should be let out of it. I'd like you to do a deal with any bank and tell them you didn't understand and see how they're going to let you out of that. Legal disclaimer. So obviously there are people out there who have attachments, who are creating attachments, have hitchhikers, asking hitchhikers to hop on along. They serve a purpose, and they get to a point in life where they either want to keep it, and again, if they want to keep it, leave it alone. It's not your business, okay? That is like ramming religion down someone's throat. If you don't want it done to you, don't do it to anybody else. You can be a shining star and you can show people what it's like not to have that. And if they're interested, be a resource for them. But do not go nagging at them. You can remind them, especially those of you who are in relationships with people who have attachments or hitchhikers, or if they're your family member or your close friend, when they start acting up, or after they've acted up and then they start asking you about the consequences of their actions or start moaning about it, you can gently remind them, like, hey, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you did some self-work and, decided to give up the ghost, if you will. But again, it's not your business to force somebody. I have had very frank conversations with certain people who have them, and as long as they knowingly understand what they are in league with, I have no issues. If that's what they want to keep, that's what they want to keep. As long as I know that I'm talking to the person and that they're actually hearing me. And, most of the time you will have those clarity moments where the actual person is there fully understanding you. They're not being influenced by the other thing, because that's almost how the attachment gets its jollies, right? It enjoys the fact that this person knowingly still wants it there. It is happy by that. And that gets a little confusing, because for the average person who doesn't have one, you would think, why would anyone want to, stay in league with something like that? But it's not your business. And to be honest, I have people that I absolutely love and adore who have attachments. So it doesn't make them a bad person. Sometimes they do weird things or things that I don't want to be around or participate in, and that's fine. Go do that elsewhere. But it doesn't make them a bad person. And this is why this is a little more advanced, is because understanding that and having compassion for how it occurred in the first place, and that sometimes it is a defense mechanism and it is a barrier between this person and the world of hurt that they're not able to deal with. And if you can understand that, and if you can work with them on healing that old wound, then you're going to get somewhere. Are they ever fully going to give it up? Nope, but they might be able to manage it a little bit better, right? So at the end of the day, they're not bad people. They just had weird circumstances. And like I said, for the people who are older, who knowingly go into contracts with this, are they bad people? No. And as long as it's, they're both consenting, the entity and the human are both consenting, then it's a-okay. It's only when it's a situation where it's non-consensual. That's when you want to bring in the big guns, right? So this next portion, let's talk about the ramifications of dealing with someone who has an attachment. Okay, so we've gone into why someone would have it, how they have it, how they interact, how you can kind of help them help themselves. But now let's go into your personal interaction with someone who has an attachment or a hitchhiker, and how to keep yourself safe. Because at the end of the day, that's what I care about, right? So obviously, I've done the instructional video of how to bubble and clear yourself. I did another one about energetic vampires and energy sappers. You can create like almost a hose hole going down to the center of the earth between you and that person, and all the bleh that they're spewing, you can just dump right down that so it's not hitting you directly. And those are all wonderful ways. I already have videos on those. If you need either of those, they are free on the channel under the spiritual protection playlist. But let's talk about some of the things that happen in interacting with people who have attachments. So you're just a regular person and you're hanging out with your friend who has an attachment, and this, you've done some spiritual work, You're really, really glowing with your light that day, let's say. And all of a sudden, your friend is just in a really dark mood. First thing I would say is, if you can, excuse yourself and get out of the situation. So if it's prudent, physically get yourself away from whoever this person is. Because if this thing is annoyed by your light, it's not going to get any better as the evening goes on, shall we say. And it's better just to not have a big old fight and just walk away. If it's a situation where you are stuck together, let's say you're on a boat in the middle of the ocean, right? So you can't easily just get off the boat and walk away. And this thing starts rearing its ugly head. You obviously are going to just light blast yourself and bubble. You're going to shine a little light, like a mini little light blast, but more focused, kind of like a Care Bear stare. And then you are going to, in your mind, not out loud, you could do either, but more than likely in your mind is probably better, send the thing a message and say, I am not here to annoy you, and I would prefer if you stand down so that we don't have a negative interaction. Usually this has to happen when you become a threat in some way and the attachment or the hitchhiker start acting up, right? Sometimes it can just be that you're filled with light, you're in a really good place, and that just annoys it. It's the best example I can give you is a really, really happy sing-songy morning person, myself, to someone who is not a morning person and who hasn't had their coffee, right? They're just going to be super annoyed with me. So I'm going to just walk away from them, let them have their coffee, give them a little bit of time. If we're in a situation where we're stuck together, I'm going to be quiet and just let them know, hey, I'm going to be quiet for right now, and I'm going to be over here until you get your coffee or you calm down on whatever your trip is for the moment. Once in a long while, you will get certain people, and some of you already probably instinctually know, where you can sense if someone has an attachment, especially if it's dark. Well, very few attachments are anything but dark, so yeah. In that instance, some of you just sense it, you already know it. Other people get it where it's almost like a visceral emotional reaction where they just really dislike that person. And that's Spirit's way of kind of giving you a warning. And whether that warning is you really need to bubble, or hey, you might want to stay away from this person right now, or whatever it is, right? But you also have to counterbalance that visceral reaction of just disliking the other person and understand and give them love and compassion. Because obviously, if you know the person, you don't just want to like hate them right away. So there are other times when I've had people say, well, you know, I'm just living my life, minding my business, and like this person randomly sought me out and was just super aggressive or gnarly or whatever word you want to use, right, with me. And if that happens, there's two things potentially at play. Number one, energetically, you could be doing something that's just warranting irking. It's irking something, right? And so that something's going to come on really bold and out of nowhere. The other thing, though, is potentially, and I'm saying this with grace and love, there is a potential that if you notice people are going out of their way to be aggressive, mean, and rude to you, and you've done absolutely nothing to warrant it, like you're just in the grocery store minding your own business, and people are almost going out of their way to come up to you and be rude or mean or hostile. And there's, again, you know, you're not wearing anything that's ticking people off or anything like that. You really have to take a look at yourself at that moment and ask 2 questions. Number 1, is there a vibe that I'm giving off that I am interfering with other people's energy? Okay? Because sometimes we can do that and not even know it. And number 2, is there a potential that I have a rip in my web, or I have a potential opening that something is trying to get through in order to attach to me? And I know some of you just went, whoa, because that isn't always talked about. Because a lot of times we think, well, we've done the work and we're doing this and I'm bubbled and I feel good. And then these really poopy people are coming out of absolutely nowhere. And why are they being mean to me? I didn't deserve that. But sometimes it's energetically, you were just interfering with other people's energy and they didn't like it. But a lot of times it's because these things sense a weakness within you and they are almost doing this to create a bigger hole so they can worm their way through and attach on you. I want you to think of almost like the abuser syndrome, right? What do they do to their victims? They wear their victims down, wear down their self-esteem, wear down their patience, wear down all of that so that they have a much easier victim to control. So if you're starting to notice that people are coming out of the woodwork and just being absolutely awful, then it's one of those 2 things that you need to figure out what's going on. And hey, let's face it, right now we live in a really weird energetic time, okay? And that's why bubbling and being very cognizant of what your energy is going out in the world is extremely important, because there are a ton of people out there right now who are in a pretty negative space. And sometimes if you shine just a little too bright, that's just going to ignore them. But there is another thing that I've been seeing, and that is that these things are rampant and they are looking for any little way in. So what do? They start trying to rip holes at something. And everyone has things that they're sensitive about, right? So if you're super sensitive about, I don't know, something to do with your looks, and you notice that you're in a very random place, like let's say grocery store, right? I just use that because I was just there. But you're in a grocery store and you notice everyone who walks by you is looking you up and down with like a weird snarky look. What does that do? It makes you super duper self-aware, and your energy now becomes small because you feel, your self-esteem is getting lowered and you're hyper fixating on whatever it is that you think people are looking at. And then when your energy is small, what happens? Well, potentially your protections are down because you're looking for energetic confidence booster from other people. And you're not getting that, right? So then your energy becomes very small, your bubbles come down, and then bam, something's able to just come on in and stick onto you. And that's why daily clearings are extremely important. Besides just your salt baths and your salt showers, in the instructional video, I also go through how to personally clear yourself. Quick reminder on that: feet flat on the floor, get in your body, ground, feet grow true roots into the earth, rod God from the center of your body, a light rod going all the way up to spirit, source, universe, whatever you want to call it. And then basically from the small of your back, a hose going down to the middle of the earth, and then bring your aura in, tuck it into the hose, and just start releasing. And you can say out loud, all the energy that is not mine, the energy that does not serve my highest good, release it down the cord, down to the center of the earth where it's cleansed and cleared in fire, where it can be rejuvenated and reused for something good elsewhere. Immediately light blast yourself and then reset your 3 bubbles. If you have had something like this happen to you recently, or even in something that you can think of memory of, like, that was a really weird day, right? People almost went out of their way to be, mean to me, or other names that you might want to say. Again, always take a look at yourself first. Was there something I was doing? Was there something I was wearing? Is there some reason why people would act this way? If you've taken all of that out of the equation, then you want to go into, okay, are there things that I need to shore up? And then after you've done your complete clearing, bubbling, you want to go in and basically scan yourself head to toe and your auric web, your spiritual web and aura. And you want to look at both and see, are there any holes? Is there anything that I need to shore up? And I can almost guarantee you that you're going to find something. Because let's face it, we're all adults and we all have many things going on. We all have issues. We all have things happening in our lives. So we all have little things that might make us easier targets than others. And it's being strong and bold and standing up and working and doing that hard work in order to make yourself not a target. And I don't mean by hiding or shying away, because I am not one to shy away from confrontation. If someone wants it, that's fine. Let's do this. Let's get everything out on the table and let's confront it. But I'm also not going anywhere looking for a fight, right? Because I always believe that there's easier ways that we can come to a consensus, talk about it, and work things out. And sometimes working things out just means energetically everyone's sitting in their perspective corners and staying out of other people's business. One last thing that just flashed into my mind. Some of you out there, because you're very new with some of your skills, you get very curious about the world and the people around you. And so energetically, you go kind of curiously poking around in other people's energy fields. Whether this is you're out with complete and utter strangers or you're with people you know. But just like you wouldn't want someone, physically groping you to see what your body looks like or is made of through your clothes, don't do that energetically to other people without permission. Okay? You can get things and information just by being, and people's aura just kind of crossing yours, information will come. But all it takes is curiosity killed the cat, right? All it takes is you thinking, oh, this person doesn't know anything about anything. Let me just go, muddle through their energy really quick. And that person feels it and they send a little spiny spike back. I've had people do it to me because they're curious or for whatever reason. And, I'm nicer about it. I just kind of gently bubble them out with love of like, hey, don't go there. But I have had some people be very, very invasive. And, general rule, if you don't want it being done to you, don't do it to other people. But if someone's going to do it to you and you've asked them nicely, please don't do that, and they keep doing it, then you have every right to boot them out. And sometimes that will end up with a nasty look. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because, we're curious creatures, right? Especially a lot of you that you're developing a lot of these senses. A lot of you have woken up extremely quickly. I mean, extremely. I've had a couple of you that it's been like 2 or 3 weeks and like, whoa. And it's astonishing and it's wonderful and I absolutely love it. But just remember, kind of stay in your own lane and be respectful of other people the same way that you want them to respect you. You wouldn't want someone coming to your house and just rifling through your fridge and your closet. So if you don't want someone doing that to you, don't go doing that energetically to somebody else because it's rude. And also because people on some instinctual level, whether or not they're spiritually gifted or they even understand that you're doing it, they feel it. And that can also get you some pretty odd looks and some also weird interactions. I hope all of this information has helped you. I know I beat a couple things really, really hard, but again, this is just a part of the teaching process and trying to be helpful and make these things understandable, because some of these concepts are hard to understand, and especially when you're coming from a place of love and you want good things for other people, it's really hard to understand why some people want to hold on to, stuff that maybe we wouldn't. But again, everyone is an individual. Everyone has their individual reasons for it. So please be kind, be respectful, spread love and light, not hate. And I wish you all the absolute best.